Welcome back to the deep dive.
Hello again.
So today we're we're going to be undertaking a necessary but a very difficult analysis.
Yeah, this is a tough one.
We're taking the stack of sources surrounding the homicide of 11-year-old Audrii Cunningham in Livingston, Texas, and our mission really is to just establish a clear, factual record.
Exactly. And for you, the listener, this deep dive is about, much more than just retracing the steps of a tragedy.
Yeah.
We are really focusing on the background of the perpetrator,
Okay.
the connections, and most critically, the extensive criminal history that the sources reveal. That's what allowed him to be so close to Audrii in the first place.
That proximity, that really is the central, just heartbreaking hook here.
Mm-hmm.
Audrii Danielle Cunningham, born in 2013, she was reported missing on February 15th, 2024.
Right.
She was last seen on her way to the school bus stop, but she never made it there. And it captured national attention almost immediately.
Well, and what's fascinating here, in a tragic way, is how fast the response was. When a child doesn't show up for school, every single minute matters.
Of course.
Authorities issued an Amber Alert extremely quickly. They recognized the danger level almost right away.
And those first search efforts, they gave us that first terrifying clue.
The backpack.
The backpack, yeah. The sources detail it was discovered relatively quickly, found near the spillway of Lake Livingston.
And that discovery immediately shifts everything. It's no longer just a missing person case.
Oh.
Suddenly it's a suspected abduction, or, worse. It forced authorities to just concentrate all their efforts right there.
It basically confirmed the fear that she hadn't just, wandered off.
Exactly. But the search itself was excruciating. It was 5 days. 5 days passed before they had a conclusion.
And it was the worst possible outcome. On February 20th, Audrii's body was recovered from the Trinity River.
That gap, that 5-day period, must have been just an incredibly tense time for everyone.
It's a crucial timeline because even during that time, the focus had already started to narrow in on one specific person.
Even before her body was found.
Exactly. Which brings us to Section 1, the person who had this terrifyingly easy access to her, Don Stephen McDougal.
And if we look at the bigger picture here, the speed of his initial apprehension is really key. The perpetrator, 42-year-old Don Stephen McDougal, he was actually taken into custody on February 16th.
Wait, the 16th? That's the day after she disappeared.
The very next day.
So he was arrested before they even found her body. What was the charge?
He was initially arrested on a different but, related charge. It was for aggravated assault, so the police had him in custody quickly.
Huh.
Then, on February 20th, once the confirmation came that Audrii's body had been located, the charges were immediately escalated. First to murder, and then later, formally, to 2 counts of capital murder.
That is just a remarkable sequence of events, but let's get into the mechanics of his access. How was McDougal able to get so close to Audrii? I mean, to be trusted to take her to the bus stop?
The sources make this disturbing relationship very, very clear. McDougal was described as a friend of Audrii's father.
A family friend.
But it was more than just a casual friendship. He lived in a trailer that was located directly on the family's property.
Right on the property. Wow.
Yeah. So he wasn't just an acquaintance. He was an integrated, proximal presence.
He was an insider.
Precisely. And that trust was, physically manifested by the fact that he was sometimes the one tasked with taking Audrii to her school bus stop.
So he was part of the daily routine.
Exactly. Given the highest level of trust you can give someone who isn't family.
It's chilling to think about that being exploited. I also remember a strange detail about his actions right before the arrest.
The Facebook posts.
Yeah, the sources mentioned he posted on Facebook claiming he was not guilty. It's such a strange, preemptive thing to do.
It is. It suggests he knew immediately that he was a person of interest.
Yeah.
And then, following the capital murder charges, his confinement status changed immediately. He was held without bail.
Which reflects how strong the evidence must have been even in those first few days.
Absolutely.
So that proximity is shocking, but what the sources really show is that this wasn't an isolated mistake by an otherwise clean person. We have to look at the decades of documented red flags.
Right.
This brings us to the real core of this deep dive, Don Stephen McDougal's truly extensive criminal history.
And this is where the narrative really shifts from the immediate crime to a systemic failure or, at least a significant risk. The sources show he had a lengthy criminal record in Texas.
How far back does it go?
It stretches back nearly 20 years, starting around 2003, and continuing right up until his arrest in 2024. This was not a single lapse in judgment. It was a decades-long pattern.
And we're not talking about minor infractions here. The list of charges is pretty
It
significant.
includes assault, theft, possession of methamphetamine, unauthorized use of a vehicle.
Huh.
It paints a picture of escalating issues.
And he had been in and out of the system recently, too.
Very recently, his last prison sentence was 2 years for unauthorized use of a vehicle. He completed that sentence in September 2022.
So he had only been out of the correctional system for about a year and a half when he committed this
A
crime.
year and a half, that's it.
This detail makes the next point just all the more critical. I mean, if he has this history, the legal system has had so many opportunities to intervene. We absolutely have to talk about the specific prior offense involving a minor that the sources highlighted.
This is where we need to slow down and really unpack the judicial decision here.
Okay.
The sources explicitly detail that McDougal had a previous charge for child molestation.
Right. A charge that, on its own, has huge implications for public safety registry.
Massive.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the final charge he was convicted of, was it?
No. And this is the critical plea deal that, you have to scrutinize.
The original, more serious charge of child molestation was pled down in court
To what?
to the lesser offense of enticing a minor.
Okay, so what does enticing a minor legally mean versus molestation? And why was that distinction so important here?
Well, from a legal standpoint, child molestation typically involves sexual contact, and it almost always results in a mandatory placement on the sex offender registry.
Okay, that makes sense.
Enticing a minor often covers behaviors like soliciting or trying to lure a minor. It's often seen as a precursor crime. The difference in this context wasn't about the act itself, but about the classification of the conviction.
And the practical implication of that classification change is
Yeah.
enormous, right?
It determines all public oversight. Because the charge was reduced, it allowed him to remain entirely off the sex offender registry.
Completely off.
Completely off. He did serve a 2-year prison sentence for that reduced charge, so the system recognized a threat. But when he was released, he carried no public designation, no warning to the community.
Wait, so this person, known to law enforcement for decades, convicted of a sex crime involving a minor, was released back into the community free of registry requirements, and was then able to just seamlessly integrate into a family structure where he was driving a child to school.
That is the essential, devastating insight from the sources. The significance of that specific plea deal. It just cannot be overstated. It removed the necessary systemic barrier.
Because if he'd been on the registry,
If he had been on the registry, it's highly unlikely he would have been allowed to live on the family's property or that he ever would have been entrusted with Audrii.
it just raises this powerful and painful question about how judicial leniency, specifically in plea bargaining, can directly impact public safety years down the line.
Absolutely. Especially with escalating criminal behavior and access to vulnerable people. That decision to accept that plea deal essentially neutralized the one mechanism designed to alert communities to this exact type of risk.
He had proximity, trust, and zero mandatory public accountability for that very serious prior offense. So let's move now to the aftermath and the legal finality of this tragedy. Once the body was recovered, the forensic investigation, it provided the cause of death and revealed some specific grim details.
Yeah, the autopsy confirmed what everyone feared. It was homicidal violence. Audrii died from blunt head trauma.
And the sources revealed another detail about how she was found.
They did. It shows the malicious nature of the crime and the attempt to conceal it. Her body was found in the Trinity River, tied to a rock.
Just awful. Turning to the judicial process now, McDougal was quickly indicted on 2 counts of capital murder on April 22, 2024.
Right. The wheels of justice, at least in this specific case, moved pretty fast toward a final conclusion.
And that conclusion came earlier this year.
It did. On January 17, 2025, Don Stephen McDougal pleaded guilty to Audrii Cunningham's murder. So he avoided a lengthy trial.
And in Texas, pleading guilty to capital murder, that carries an automatic and irreversible sentence.
That's correct. By pleading guilty, McDougal was automatically sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So he'll never be released.
He will never be released back into the community.
Beyond the legal process, the sources also documented the deep, painful impact this had on the community itself.
Of course.
A memorial service was held for Audrii on March 2nd, where she was remembered as precious, gentle, and kind. This case just. It quickly became a painful example in national media discussions.
Right. Discussions about missing children, but also about the dangers posed by people known to the family, not just strangers.
So if we look back across this entire narrative, what are the key takeaways for you?
I think if we're boiling it down, there are three essential insights for you to take away. First, the disturbing accessibility the killer had.
The trusted insider.
The trusted insider living right there on the family property. Second, the sheer length and the clear pattern of his criminal behavior over 2 decades.
And third, and this is the most critical part for understanding prevention, that specific legal mechanism that failed.
The plea deal. The previous charge of child molestation being reduced to enticing a minor.
That one decision just changes everything.
It does. That history forces us to confront the systemic issue. That plea deal kept him off the sex offender registry, which basically allowed him to operate without the oversight designed for individuals exactly like him.
And I think this is the final thought we want to leave you with, building on everything we've analyzed today. If the system of community warnings, like the sex offender registry, is contingent on the final charge of conviction rather than the severity of the initial crime reported, then how reliable is that system? How well does it actually assess and mitigate risk?
That's the question, isn't it? The sources show McDougal's criminal history was extensive, yet one plea bargain prevented the community from ever knowing the full risk he posed. So you have to consider the broader implications of judicial decisions that might prioritize, say, caseload efficiency over mandated public transparency, especially for people who have access to vulnerable children.
It's a very sobering reality brought to life by the factual record of this devastating case. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.